Hi, this is Jim Smith, Dairy Strategic Account Manager. Today I've been talking about how we're optimizing BMR and non-BMR corn silage acres to get the most milk production, yet still have the best bottom line on the farm. And we covered basically showing that it's really important to get that BMR in the cows pre-calving and right after calving. But after that, after they get past that peak milk production and they're already up to peak dry matter intake, that we can actually get equal production with a non-BMR and have those agronomic benefits behind that. And we show the income and the costs that are associated with that.
Introduction, I'm Joe Altsfield, agronomist in Northwest Wisconsin, as I mentioned earlier. And today we got a great presentation about how to feed BMR a little bit smarter. So I'm going to kick it over to Jim and let us jump right in.
Okay, my name is Jim Smith. I'm the Dairy Strategic Account Manager for Northern Wisconsin, and I spend a little bit of time down in Dane County. So what we're here today for is really what's up on the screen. It's really about the net income, net farm. I put that in there in particular, farm dairy income. So we're going to look at a couple of things today. It's going to be about milk income, but also on the agronomic side when we're talking about BMR and non-BMR. We'll get right into it. So how we're going to move through this is going to be, first, we're going to understand those important differences between BMR and non-BMR. Then we're going to look at when and why are those differences really important, right? There are times when they're really important, and how we're going to do that is we've got really 4 to 5 very good, independent, controlled research studies over quite a span of time, 2001 to 2014, that are so close in being the same setup. It's amazing. And the results are amazingly similar too. So the bottom line though is we're going to finish with what's that got to do with optimizing net income on the dairy. All right. So understanding the important differences between BMR and non-BMR silages. We're going to compare the two from a dairy cow standpoint and an agronomic standpoint. So BMR, why would you plant it? Why would you do anything with it? That's the only thing I can come up with. There might be others, but I'm not aware of them. That would be the one, okay? I think everybody pretty well understands that. When we talk about non-BMR compared to BMR, it looks like a pretty big commercial, but don't take this presentation that way because we're very much pro-BMR, but we're also very pro non-BMR for some reasons that we hope to show you today. The other thing too is we're going to talk about the pendulum swing, and I'll probably mention this a couple times, right? We always have a tendency to let that pendulum swing a little too far. So there's been people that have been non-BMR, they tried BMR, maybe they got a great milk response, so they decided we're going all BMR. Maybe they were non-BMR, tried BMR, didn't get that big response, and they said, heck with that, I'm not doing anything. We're going to talk about where we hope that pendulum ends up in that swing, okay? So,
And I've already touched on this, but we're going to hound on it again. The only nutritional aspect you consider planting and feeding BMR is spike. Just again, push back, feel differently, but we want to focus on this aspect and take the presentation from there.
So when or why are these differences relevant? I think that's the key with BMR. When and why. So now, since we're into 2020, over 20 years ago, Dr. Maurice Eastridge at Ohio State University looked back on the research prior to 1999 and said, over 10 studies, we got these great responses on cows eating more feed. Anywhere from 1.1 to 7.3 pounds more dry matter per day. And if you think about 10 cents a pound on a cost of dry matter a day, which I think is pretty close, you know, that's 11 to 73 cents, right? But the production response was so highly variable, right? Across those 10 studies, it only averaged 2.2 pounds, right? And sometimes it was even negative. And it's like, what the heck? Why would that be? So that was kind of the impetus for these studies that we're going to go through. People wanted to know when and why does it work? And when doesn't it work, right? So the primary studies that we're going to look at, I put this up there so that you can see what these differences were in the silages, okay? if you look, what I've got here is just, everybody measures NDFD a little bit differently, but in general, on the 3 studies where I was able to get the information, the BMR that they used versus the non-BMR on the fiber digestibility rating that they used was roughly 30 to 35%, quote unquote, more digestible. That's a pretty significant difference, right? That's a big difference on fiber digestibility. Look at this one, right? Just for instance, 17 points different. That's a fairly familiar number that people are used to, 30-hour NDFD, 17 points different. Keep that one in mind because I think it just comes home so well. But the first one we're going to talk about is a study that was done in 2003 at Michigan State. And again, 30% difference in the fiber digestibility of the 2 corn silages they used. But the one thing that I want you to see on this one that's really key to the whole presentation was in this particular study, they did not feed any BMR pre-calving. They just had the cows calve, put them into the groups, and they either got BMR or they didn't get BMR in their lactating diet, okay? Why is that important? Well, what we got here are the milk responses in this study that shows they did it in 25-day groupings, right? About the milk response they got, and this is kilograms per day. Here's your BMR versus non-BMR. And here's the reliability and the results they got, how predictive it is. And what's interesting is that when you look at this study, even though we had that 30% difference in NDFD, we got no significant response in milk production between the 2 groups. And when you got out here to 125 to 300 days, again, no significant response in milk production. But what happened in between, they got a heck of a significant response. Anything that's P less than 0.05 is highly significant. So very significant differences here from 50 to 100 days. But again, nothing early. And what's the whole idea between non-BMR and BMR, right? We know we've got a very fragile fiber, right, with BMR that breaks down quicker, right, moves out quicker from the cow so that she can eat more feed, right, which is what we want in early lactation. And we're going to show you we want that before they calve too. So that's the whole key between BMR and non-BMR. That fiber is so much more fragile. It's breaking down quicker, moving out quicker so the cows eat more feed and reduce negative energy balance and whatever else is going on with the cow. So again, that's a key one to remember, not fed pre-calving.
Feeding BMR, pre-calving. How do we know that? So Jim's going to take us through some really nifty graphs over the bulk of this presentation. We're going to look at dry matter versus till production on these different setups. I think it's important just to have a look at what types of studies were these and how much can we rely on this data. What I find interesting about what we pulled from these is that 3 different, very controlled environments across a unique time frame as well. So we got a 2001 study, we got 2006 study, we got something for 2014. So we pretty much covered a good set of time frame there. Like I said, we got 3 different institutions running highly controlled studies here, so that we can extract some really meaningful outcomes, knowing that we just didn't walk into a farm, throw them in some piles of farm, and walk back and grab some data. Nicely controlled studies that we can feel confident about the data that we're extracting from it. So just want to make sure that we give you that piece of information on the front end.
All right.
And then as far as the study design goes, the other neat thing about these 3 studies we're going to walk through is that they all were pretty much set up the same exact way. Where they decided to feed BMR prior to calving. They fed BMR for a few weeks after calving. And they switched all these calves over to conventional silage. That's pretty much what I just got summarized here. Again, all 3 BMR or non-BMR, 21 to 28 days before expected calving date. And so we'll look at a USDA and Cornell studies where they're fed BMR or non-BMR. Lactating cows are treated 5 weeks postpartum, then fed only non-BMR corn silage. So the important point here is that we're looking at this experimental group where they got BMR versus non-BMR, pre and post calving, but then every single one of these cows got switched over to conventional silage thereafter, and that's where we're going to see some stuff pop out. And lastly, in this Utah State study, they broke it out into a few more different groups, and I'm just going to let Jim take that as once we get to those slides and talk about how those different groups perform each one.
You bet. All right. So this slide's really busy, but I wanted to give you some information because a lot of questions usually come up, well, were they high corn silage diets, low corn silage? What were they? And so I'm going to give you a few numbers here. So on the USDA study, dry cows and lactating, they were right around that 38 to 39% on a dry matter basis, corn silage. So fairly high corn silage diets. And you can see down here, they weren't slacking on the grain either. The 35% all across there to go with that. So very high energy, high production type diets. You look at the Cornell study, they went even higher, close to 48% pre-calving, 42, 40% post-calving. And again, you look at the grain that they were feeding with it, 44%, 42%. So again, extremely highly fermentable, high energy type diets. And then we go out to Utah State, maybe a little bit of difference because they included more alfalfa in their diets. So we are around that 31, 30% range as far as on a dry matter basis within the diet. So relatively high corn silage diets that we would be familiar with here. Okay, so we're going to talk about the USDA study, but some of the data was not there. But on these other two, I'm just highlighting it again. Very different corn silages. Here, I couldn't actually get the data from that study. I was still trying this morning. But this was a F2F 569 BMR, and this was a DeKalb 6172. And if anybody knows DeKalb, they don't worry too much about fiber digestibility. So I'm sure the differences were just as great here as on the other ones. All right, so we're going to go through dry matter intakes, and then we're going to look at milk production. And again, I didn't have specific dry matter intakes on the USDA, so we're just going to, on the dry matter intakes, just look at Cornell and the Utah State. All right, so on this graph, what you've got here on the horizontal axis is the weeks, with a negative in front of it, is the weeks before calving, and then here on is weeks after calving. On this vertical axis, you have kilograms of dry matter per day that they're eating, okay? The dark box is the BMR corn silage. The lighter box is the conventional corn silage or non-BMR. So what do we have? Well, pretty easy to see, right? The BMR cows pre-calving from day 14 to day of calving had significantly higher intakes. And the first 3 weeks, those BMR-fed cows that got BMR pre-calving also had highly significant dry matter intakes. Very much improved. That's what we want, right? That's what we're looking for, all right? But let's remember what happened. There was a 17-point difference in the NDFD on those two corn silages. Very different products. But at 3 weeks postpartum, all cows went to the conventional or non-BMR corn silage, and look what happened. The BMR cows still kept eating more feed. Kind of got tied together as you went out here, but they kept eating more feed. And we're going to see what it does to milk production here in a couple of slides. So pretty interesting that that's what the result was. So let's look at Utah State. Very similar again. So pre-calving, down here, -1 to -4. Post-calving, out here, kilograms of dry matter per intake per day. Cows fed the BMR pre-calving were higher in dry matter intake again, okay? Which makes sense, right? Cows will eat more feed when they're challenged on intakes if it's a more digestible fiber. They'll eat more feed because it breaks down and moves out quicker. Guess what? After calving at week 1, now, in this particular study, they broke it out to where, okay, we had the non-BMR and BMR pre-calving, and then after calving, what they've got is they took the non-BMR cows and they continued to either get non-BMR after calving or they gave them BMR after calving. Then they took the BMR cows that got pre and gave it to them post-calving, but they also had a group that was BMR before calving and non-BMR after calving. And guess what? If you look at this, the BMR-fed cows, the ones that got BMR before calving, right, were the ones that had the higher intakes, whether they got non-BMR afterwards or BMR. So again, getting that BMR into them pre-calving made a difference, a big difference. All right, Here's one to keep in mind for later on when we get into the economic discussion. You got out here to 16 weeks, right? You've got your non-BMR cows down here eating. You've got your BMR cows up here that are either getting BMR or non-BMR, but they had BMR pre-calving. And look at the gap in the intakes. Quite significant. We'll come back to that, but look what it does. The ones that were on non-BMR, both pre and post, we're at a 2.12 on energy-corrected milk per pound of dry matter intake, all the way down to 1.39. But the common denominator here is the BMR post-calving out at 16 weeks. The feed efficiency was definitely lower. Okay? So we'll talk more about that later on. All right. Now let's get into what pays the bills. Okay? Milk production. So again, just to refresh on the horizontal axis here, this is all postpartum. This is after they calve, so 4 weeks post-calving, and then all the way out to 13 weeks. Here's the milk production, pounds per day. And what do we have? So don't forget, pre-calving, they either got BMR or non-BMR. The cows that were fed BMR 3 weeks pre-calving and 4 weeks post-calving produced 6.2 pounds more 3.5% fat-corrected milk. Okay? What happened later? Everybody got switched to the non-BMR, right? Everything out past this line is all non-BMR, right? Non-BMR, and then what happens? Even after switching them to the non-BMR, the BMR-fed cows pre-calving in that first 4 weeks maintained that milk advantage all the way out through the remainder of the trial to say what happens early is what's important. Okay? All right. So let's look at Cornell now, their milk production. Again, it's day of calving all the way out to 16 weeks, fat-corrected milk kilograms per day. And again, all three of these studies, high-producing animals, over 100 pounds, right, on the average. And even USDA back in 2001, they were getting close to 80 or 90, but the Cornell in Utah, over 100 pounds, okay? So if you look at this, those BMR-fed cows, it almost looks like a duplicate of what was done at USDA, right? BMR-fed cows, the ones that are in that top line up here, produce 6.6 pounds more energy-corrected milk the first 3 weeks of lactation than the non-BMR cows, okay? Which is what we'd expect, right? It's what we'd expect, all right? But don't forget, they went from that 57 NDFD, or I should say 74 NDFD silage to a 57 at this time frame, and those BMR-fed cows that were fed BMR first 3 weeks and the last 3 weeks of before calving just kept on going. Just kept on going. Now, I would think that if you gave somebody a 17-point different NDFD silage at 3 weeks post-calving, they'd probably get constipated and leave, right? Compared to what that BMR was like. But they didn't. And guess what? Even after they started getting that 57 NDFD, those cows maintained a 5.7 pound energy-corrected milk advantage for the remainder of the study over 16 weeks, even though they completely switched out their corn silage. Okay? All right, keep going here. All right, here's Utah. Again, this is where they broke it out. So again, BB is they got BMR before calving, BMR after calving, BMR before calving, non-BMR after calving, non-BMR before and after, non-BMR before and BMR after, okay? Those are the signals. Here we are, weeks postpartum, and here's your milk, kilograms per day, all right? So what do we got? Week 1. Down here at the bottom is cows that got non-BMR before calving and non-BMR after calving. Highly significant difference in milk production between them and the ones that got BMR before and BMR after, okay? Makes sense, right? Makes good sense. The one you can't see real well is right there, right above that little red line. Guess what group that is? That was the other group that got non-BMR before calving and BMR after. Even though they got the BMR calving, after calving, it's just like that Michigan State study, right? They didn't get the BMR before. Guess what? They didn't do very well on BMR after calving. Okay? And so what do we got when we go further out? At 4 weeks, look where the difference is again. Very significant difference between cows that received BMR pre-calving, that's that box right here, and BMR post-calving, exactly what you'd expect, right? Then you look who's lowest. It's the ones that got the non-BMR calving, before calving, and BMR after. Very significant difference there. So again, it matters a lot that we're getting the BMR in the cows before they calve, if we're going to get that response that we're looking for post-calving. Okay? Now, you get further out, and you can see, guess what? Guess what two groups those are? It's the ones that got BMR before calving. Now, there's not significant differences in milk production out here, but boy, oh boy, isn't that nice to see them? Because don't forget, what happened was they started getting, I'm sorry, I thought I had it on that one. But right in here at 4 weeks is when they all went to non-BMR, or not in this group, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused. So that's the key point. Look at them out here. The BMR cows that got it before calving are still holding that advantage in milk production. All right. If you go out here, further out, again, what I already said was the ones that got the BMR before calving are the ones that are still holding that in that milk production advantage. Wasn't significant, but they were still holding it.
You know what the dry matter intake was? By the time they got to 4 and 8 weeks when they went from BMR to non-BMR, that dry matter intake, was that difference in production from dry matter intake or feed efficiency?
It was dry matter intake, where they got the milk. It's where they got the milk. And that goes back, it lined right up with all the original work that Obanala did at Michigan State, right? When they did the original work on BMR in 1999, they were trying to explain the milk production difference, right? And when they got down and did all the energetic equations and everything else, what'd they find? They couldn't explain the increase in milk production from the quote-unquote improved energy digestibility of the BMR. They couldn't explain that increase in milk. It had to be because it was breaking down quicker, moving out quicker, getting more total feed through the cow. That's what explained the milk production advantage. And the same thing happened here.
When they went from BMR to conventional, they lost that, but the cow was conditioned to eat more anyway.
Right. So think about it. Anybody that's managed dairies, right? You get a cow off to a good start. She's eating more feed before she calves. She's eating more feed right after she calves. That's one you don't have to worry about, right? She's going to do better. She's pulling less off her back. The non-esterified fatty acids and the BHBA numbers are all going to be better if she's pulling less off her back because she's eating more. But once they get out to that 7 or 8 weeks, if a cow's doing well, has anybody ever had any trouble getting Holsteins to eat enough feed? Probably not. Probably not. Okay.
Before we transition to the economics of everything that we've discussed so far, I'm just going to put a nice little bow around some of the major points so far. And if you've been paying attention and clear, you see that we've tried to emphasize this point right here, that being positive effect of feeding BMR on pre-fresh cows. You can see that in the 3 studies that have been presented so far. Secondly, in postpartum cows, they respond to higher feed intakes and higher milk production when fed BMR pre-calving 3 to 5 weeks post-calving compared to cows receiving non-BMR. So it just shows you, you know. And then lastly here, cows fed non-BMR 3 to 5 weeks post-calving, fed BMR pre-calving, maintain their milk production advantage 15 weeks. There is a very prolonged impact of positioning this BMR at the correct feed that you can then reap the benefits of long-term down the road. And those are the economics I think we're going to talk about here through the next episode.
You bet. So you just think about that extra 2 to 5 pounds, whether it's in the dry period or lactating period that they're actually getting in for dry matter intakes. They're just going to be taking less off their back. They're going to continue to do better, right? So that's the gist of it. All right.
To pretty much hammer this home, the question is, are there other benefits to utilizing the food structure of the collection? See that any advantage that you can get, and now we want to talk about feed efficiency, where we really start talking about dollars and cents.
You bet. So one of the next to last studies that I'm going to talk about was a mid-lactation study done up at Minor Institute by Rick Grant and others, mainly Kurt Contact. But again, I want to emphasize the difference in the fiber digestibility of the silages used. Almost 35% different, right? So very different products, right? So mid-lactation cows averaging 196 days in milk, very high corn silage, high grain type of diet, right? Between the two, 85%. And we know that corn silage brings about half of its dry matter in grain anyway. But look what happened in this study. Cows that were being fed the BMR absolutely ate more feed, right? Almost 6 pounds more dry matter. But didn't have any effect on milk yield, milk composition, time spent eating, or time spent ruminating. So in other words, guess what, guys? They ate 50 to 60 cents more feed, and you didn't get paid for it. You didn't get paid for it. No difference in milk, okay? But you can see also those cows that were putting more feed through them had a significantly lower rumen pH over a 24-hour sampling period, which can be pretty negative if we get into a problem. Here's the big take-home from this study. Again, cows fed the BMR were eating 27.8 kilograms per day versus 25.2 for the non-BMR cows. Highly, highly significant difference. The milk per pound of dry matter intake was a 1.6 on the non-BMR versus a 1.5. And what have we done in animal agriculture, right? Guys that were making pork, making poultry, what'd they do? They got the most gain on a hog or a chicken as fast as they could to get it to market as fast as they could. Then what'd they do? They said, now can we do it for less feed? Can we do it more efficiently? And that's really, I believe, some guys are already doing it. That's where the advanced dairies are going. They're going to get to this efficiency piece. And some already are. Okay? But with 1.6, so remember that number. All right. Here's that other slide from that same study showing the BMR-fed cows in the red, the non-BMR in the blue. This is ruminal pH where they sampled it over a 24-hour period. And you can see those cows are eating more TMR, eating more feed, moving through them. Guess what it's going to do? You're going to have those drops potentially in rumen pH, right? You're not down at the critical level of a 5.3, but it doesn't take much of a hiccup to fall there, and then you got problems, okay? So again, another quote-unquote maybe not great thing about feeding a lot of feed to cows in mid to late. But what's this all got to do with the net farm income? Okay. So
you go back.
Yep. That one?
So we're not in the conventional versus the BMR. Same diet except for silage.
Yep.
So when they ate more, they brought more concentrates in.
Right.
Didn't adjust for the BMR.
Nope. So again, it's showing what happens. When they eat more feed, we got more total nutrients going past that rumen. And if it's not exactly right, you might end up with a pH drop you don't want. All right, so what's this all got to do with optimizing net income? So this is a graph that I found a few years ago that I've always enjoyed using. Basically what it shows is, here's your feed efficiency, so pounds of milk per pound of dry matter intake, and here's your days in milk. So here's your lactation curve. So what it's saying is a 28,000 pound herd over the whole course of the entire lactation is going to be roughly, quote unquote, around a 1.6 feed efficiency, right? You can see in early lactation, if you got a 28,000 pound rolling herd average, they're going to be up here in this 2.4, 2.5 range right after calving because they're using stuff off their back and just making a lot of milk. If it's 22,000, it just starts lower and finishes lower. Same with 16,000. Because we can't change that lactation curve anymore like we used to with BST. But what's critically important is where they start is where they end up. Okay? Where they start is where they end up. So it's about getting that peak milk production, right? Because that lactation curve really doesn't change. Once it peaks, it falls off the same no matter whether you peaked at 125 or 75. It's going to fall off the same. It's going to have that same curve to it. So here's where we pay all the bills, right? Today, I think 10 cents per pound of dry matter is a relatively normal feed cost. I use 17 cents per pound of milk income. So if you run off of this chart, a 16,000 pound herd at that 1.15 gross feed efficiency has about $1,329 to pay all the bills. Okay, pay all the bills, right? If you're 22,000, you've probably got about $2,100 to pay all the bills. But if you're peaking up here with a good pre-fresh and post-fresh program, you're at a 1.6, you've got quite a bit more money to pay all the bills. And that's where we're at in the United States, right? It's about milk per stall for the most part, with what we're trying to provide an eye towards optimizing net income, okay? All right, so here's the last graph I'm gonna make you, well, next to it. Well, I guess this is the last one I'm gonna make you look at. All right, so this was another study done up at Miner Institute where he was just trying to compare a very highly digestible BMR to a very highly digestible grass silage. Okay? That's all it was. What this graph is showing is here's milk production along the bottom, okay? And here's the response of those cows when they went on to these experimental diets, right? So what it's saying is anything above the 0 line means they had a positive milk response, like here and here, or when they went on to the trial with that highly digestible fiber, they had potentially a negative response. Guess what? Lower producing, later lactation cows actually do not respond and can respond. These guys had a little bit of an increase, but down here predominantly was a negative response to a higher fiber digestibility diet. So what's it saying? We've got to get it right on those early lactation, high producing cows. That's when we're challenged on dry matter intakes. That's when that higher fiber digestibility can really be beneficial. That's all this graph is saying. He also did another study in 2005, Ivan and others, that showed exactly the same thing. Okay, so here comes the money page, all right? And I'm going to break this down in two different parts. We're going to talk about the feed side / milk versus the agronomic side. Now, I use for this example 1,000 cow dairy that today would be all BMR. And again, please hear me loud and clear. This is not a slam against BMR. And it's not saying, oh, you got to go non-BMR. We're trying to get that pendulum to the right place, okay? So what it's saying is I got 1,000 cows, milking cows in the herd. Price per pound of dry matter is 10 cents. Averaging 85 pounds of milk, eating about 57 pounds of dry matter. I think those are reasonable numbers, right? So today, they've got a feed efficiency, a gross feed efficiency of 1.49. Well, if you look at that Miner Institute study on the mid and late lactation cows, if we can improve by 0.1, that means they get the same milk on that much less dry matter. And look what it does. That's 34 cents a cow a day. And if you take that over the course of, say, 220 days, 235 days, on 1,000 cow dairy, that's $91,000 in net income that you don't spend on feed. If you're 100 cow dairy, divide by 10. So it's $9,000 per 100 cows, okay? So that's the cow side, feed side. Let's go over to the agronomic side. So we look here, and the way I did my math was I said, okay, it's an all BMR herd. They're all the way over here, all BMR. And they're growing 365 days worth of BMR. So BMR all year. Yeah, make sense? All right, if we go to say, okay, we walk into this operation, we say, you know what? Based on really good, solid, independent research, if we're getting BMR to those cows 20 days before calving, as little as 3 weeks after calving, but let's say 60 days after calving, right? So instead of growing 365 days, let's do 80 days worth of BMR, okay? Let's do 80 days worth of BMR. This dairy maybe was growing 1,200 acres of corn silage. Well, if they go from all BMR to what we're proposing, it may be down to 263 acres of BMR to get the job done, right? And get these results that we just went through from controlled studies. Well, we know internally within Pioneer, our BMR versus non-BMR, right? We've got about a 12% yield advantage in our products, okay? Got about a 12% advantage. So if you think about that, if we get to cut down the BMR acres, and let's say we've got $175 average rent per acre, and you don't have to grow as many acres because we're getting more yield, that's about a $20,000 opportunity that you can put in your pocket that you don't have to do. They're going to eat less feed. You got to haul less manure. Okay? And it's pretty much standard practice. If you're going to grow a BMR, you're going to put fungicide on it. So if you've got that many fewer acres of BMR times $30 an acre for the fungicide, that's another $25,000 you can keep in your pocket. So you come down here with the agronomic plus the feed efficiency, somewhere around $14,000 per 100 cows opportunity. So big number, big number. All right, so to wrap up, we're promoting very much to get that pendulum to where you take advantage of the BMR where you need to, right? For the pre-fresh and post-fresh, maybe anywhere from 3 weeks out to 8 weeks. After that, utilize the non-BMR for that post-peak feed efficiency and agronomic. And then here comes the negative, right? Means you got to manage 2 silage phases. But most guys are managing more phases than that anyway today, right? And with L-buchnori inoculants that are on the market, we can manage 2 phases pretty well, right? We don't have to take that much off every day. And we only got about 5 months out of the year where it's a problem anyway, up here, right? When it's over 50 degrees. That's it. That's what we got. Any questions?